This video is going to be another departure from what I normally make, and I'm not normally a fan of opinion pieces, but I felt it needed to be made as I don't see a lot of discussion going on. I'll state at the beginning too, I'm not a content developer, and I would not be a good one, but I am someone who plays the game a lot and enjoys PvM. Jagex just recently released a news post regarding reworked Raids 3 rewards. There's a ton of rewards coming from Raids 3, which for about 80% of them, I am very happy with them being added. But I am disappointed by a few of them, the main one being the Heka of Tumeken. So what is this thing going to be? This is a new magical wand that will be added to Raids 3, which they have said is going to be the big nasty drop, equivalent to Scythe or T-Bow from the other raids. Which is cool because it fills out the combat triangle with a magic super weapon. This wand is going to be powered similar to the Trident or Sang, where it has a built-in spell. It will be charged with Soul and Chaos runes, which is 1 Soul and 3 Chaos runes per cast. The wand has an attack range of 6 tiles, which is 1 less than Sang. The main twist to this weapon is its attack speed. It first attacks for 2 ticks for 3 attacks, like a blowpipe, then has a final powerful 4-tick hit to finish off the cycle. A 4-attack cycle total is 10 ticks. If attacking constantly, this comes out a bit more powerful than Harm Staff, about 4% better, but with the added benefit of not requiring the standard spellbook. That cycle is saved for as much as 10 ticks. So let's say you do 3 small casts, and then you switch into T-Bow and you send a shot. Switching back would then immediately cast that 4th powerful hit. This was actually bugged in the beta, and it didn't work this way. Jagex released a beta to test out these weapons, and many people found that the original Heka was pretty cumbersome to use at many places. Ulm required an incredibly specific cycle in order to use effectively for a questionable benefit over the Sang staff. Zulrah has similar issues due to her diving underwater. For a Scythe or T-Bow equivalent, this was definitely not fitting the bill. This thing required a lot of skill to use effectively for not much benefit over alternative weapons. So what did they do with this last blog? They gave it some added effects based on your spellbook to the final powerful hit. I think tying this to spellbooks is a mistake, but we'll get into that. Keep in mind each of these special effects would be seen every 10 ticks of attacking. It has a different effect for each of the 4 spellbooks. For the standard spellbook, the final hit simply receives a 10% damage boost. For the ancient spellbook, that last hit will blast into a 3x3 area. The lunar spellbook has a utility effect, healing up to 5 teammates that are in the path of the final projectile by 5% of magic level rounded down. So that would be 4 at 99 mage, 5 if boosted with imbued heart, and 6 if loaded in Cox. As well as getting an extra tile of range, bringing it in line with the same range as Sang. Finally, the Arceus spellbook will give the wand an impermanent drain effect, similar to how Turmoil worked in RS2. It will drain the target's magic level by 5%, stacking up to 20% for repeated cycles, and boost your magic level by 50% of the drained amount, capping at 15% additional level. Based on the wording, I'm assuming they mean additional level over 99, which would be 113. 114 if they're generous and it rounds up, which is really not that high above an imbued heart of 10. They didn't mention spellbook swap spell or how that would work with the wand. Okay, let's break this down. This is a really, really complicated weapon. It took me 2 lengthy paragraphs to describe all of its effects. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it really clearly shows that Jagex is struggling to find ways to make a magical weapon that is decent. Which makes a lot of sense. Magic weapons have always been tough to make any good due to the way magic damage is calculated based on the monster's magic level. We almost always use magic only at bosses we're forced to, either due to high defense or complete immunity to other styles. Kraken, Olmhand, Zulrah, Nilocus. I can complete the entire list of bosses where mages are best DPS with Scorpia, Mimic, Nightmare, Crazy or Deranged Archaeologist, Dagonoth Rex, Barrows, Ice Demon, and the Melee Vanguard. That's it. That's all of them. So what's my problem with any of these spellbook effects? They seem interesting and powerful on paper. Well, let's go back through them. The standard spellbook gives that last hit of the Heka an extra 10% damage. That 4-tick attack equates to 50% of the Heka's DPS, so that equates to a 5% DPS increase over stock Heka. This DPS is kind of outweighed by the ability to use Thralls, so the only place I see this spellbook getting use is probably Kraken, because you can't use Thralls there. The ability to use Alex is nice, but sacrificing DPS for it when we have an Explorer's Ring is just not something I'm going to see people doing, I don't think. I also feel this effect is just kind of boring in general. What about that Ancient effect? This causes the final hit to be a 3x3 AoE. like a barrage. When I first read this, I really liked the idea. But then I thought about it, and it's an AoE attack once every 10 ticks, and that kind of limits where it's good. Generally, the only place I see this getting used is Niloca's room and Tob for catching those double spawns with proper setups. Although it would still be extremely difficult to time properly, and you would probably still end up barraging most of those double spawns anyway. It would not be better than simply barraging normally for Slayer tasks, and you wouldn't use it for the maiden crab stack as the AoE is just too slow. How about Lunars? I love the idea of this one too. Healing teammates, the final projectile flies through. But again, let's think about that. Where would you use that? Does this work if you're stacked on top of each other? My one thought for that was Olm, maybe? But then you still can't hit your entire team without everyone running or doing some strange method. And if you're bothering to do that, you can simply dodge all the damage stacking on top of each other and just running like a solo with normal magical attacks. How would this thing work for single combat encounters? Can I heal an ult at Kraken as I attack the boss? I would guess no, based on the way other things work. This would make a lot more sense and be a lot less awkward if the heal was just like a big AoE effect around you, instead of having to travel through teammates. But it still wouldn't see much use if it were to work that way either. Basically just team cocks, and maybe on an ult in certain locations. Arceus Spellbook's effect seems by far the most interesting, and definitely the one that we would see the most used. Draining the target's magic and giving it to you is useful anywhere you are forced to mage the boss due to defense. This would have huge application at Zelra and Olmhand in Team Cox. It even could see some meta shift at bosses that almost have low enough mage level for magic to be useful, but aren't quite there yet, like Bandos. Not to mention you could still use Thralls with it, making this a clear choice over the other spellbooks. The Heka is definitely going to see use inside of the raid itself. Jagex almost always implements content this way. But the Heka's uses seem pretty limited in use outside of the raid compared to the other super weapons. It'll be good in the same places magic is good currently, by 4 to 10% more than the harm staff depending on spellbook. It would be very difficult to use at Zelra due to her diving, but definitely still good there. And it's pretty much impossible to use for solo Olm, but it would definitely shine in Team Cogs. Teebo, for comparison, is the best DPS at over 25 bosses, and same with Scythe. Both of these changed where you would use melee or ranged in a lot of places, and by a dramatic margin for the most part. The only place I could see the Heka changing the style you use at a boss is maybe Bandos on Arceus Spellbook, and that magic draining effect could see some use, but I'm doubtful this would even beat Bofa at Bandos. I also worry about the tying of Heka to Spellbook, as this means if using multiple effects in a raid is meta, we have a magic cape or max cape that can change our spellbook, but only 5 times per day. Meaning we could be locked to doing a raid efficiently only 5 times a day, or potentially less if we need 2 swaps or more. Spellbook swap spell can help a lot with this, but even assuming it would work properly with the Heka, which they didn't describe, you don't have to pack a ton of extra runes to use that, as well as constantly casting the spell every couple minutes. Meaning swapping with Max Cape would be more efficient for most applications, which I feel is terrible design due to the daily limit. I'd prefer if they want to go this route that they tie these effects to attack style, or in some other way, maybe they could use the gems for the Kopesh like a hilt for the Heka, similar to Nightmare Staves to dictate its effect. Heka is going to be a small upgrade over Harm Staff, anywhere Harm was used, and Sang will still get used for its utility in most places. Does that sound even remotely similar to what the community's consensus was when Teebo or Scythe was announced? No! Those weapons were earth-shattering, meta-shifting weapons at a huge amount of bosses. People were shocked and awed when clips surfaced of Teebo at God Wars right after it came out. These weapons knocked everything else that was old out of the park. The awe of the super weapons from a raid is one of my favorite things about raids in general. This hyper rare item that just annihilates should you get your hands on it. So what could Jagex do to give the Heka some shock and awe? Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm not a content dev and I would not want to be one. But I do have some ideas. My first idea keeps that spellbook idea, maybe not tied directly to spellbook, with the 4 effects, but giving them a smaller benefit on the smaller casts. Something like the standard being boosted by a smaller amount for the 2-tick attacks. The ancient spells could be entirely AoE, but maybe only in a 1x1 area until that 4th hit lands, which would be 3x3. Arceus could drain a small amount of magic on the smaller hits, and then more on the 4th. Lunar, I think, needs a rework regardless, as there's hardly any group mage bosses, and I don't see it getting use anywhere. This would make the wand great for all places magic sees use, instead of only some of them. it would become best for barraging and be a much wider gap from the Harm Staff's power, where that's good. A reworked Lunar Heka could replace Sang as the healing utility staff of choice. And the other two spellbooks would be best for all other bosses you can mage. This solution would be nice because it keeps Jagex's current design, but it doesn't really add that meta shift I really want to see out of it. And I really think the wand needs a bigger kick in power than this. What is good about magic and what is bad about it? Magic has a ton of utility. There's loads of useful spells for different purposes across all the spellbooks. Magic struggles against things with a high magic level, which unfortunately is most bosses, which is why the T-bow is so good. What if we scrap those spellbook effects, and that Arceus effect was the main effect of the weapon, but instead for regular defense? And obviously it would drain to 0 instead. If the Heka could help your team by draining a boss's defense level with each of the 4th attack, while also being a usable weapon against the boss itself, say by cutting through the magic defense somehow, maybe rolling against only the boss's mage defense and not their level like it does normally, it could suddenly become an incredibly powerful defense-draining utility weapon in a ton of locations that are more interesting than where you normally use mage. I'm picturing your South and North mage and Tob at Maiden simply casting at the boss to drain defense and staying in mage gear to catch freezes, allowing your team to save claw specs. Maybe slicing through Tecton's defenses and draining his, so your team can switch to more powerful melee attacks. Cutting Vespula's ridiculous portal defense for your T-bow using teammates. I'm picturing it being typically within about 80% DPS of T-bow or Scythe at any given location, but boosting those two weapons substantially by draining defense where needed. This would be difficult to balance and probably require some stat changes on monsters, but would actually shift the meta and be interesting in some more places than just the current places where magic is good, while also being powerful where magic is good normally. Before I end the video, I also want to point out that Osmumten Fang is hilariously bad, to the point it seems Jagex didn't really test its DPS. Sebe has a really good video discussing this already, which I'll link in the description so you can check it out. This isn't really getting the attention it needs either. It's a 1% DPS increase against Nex and nowhere else. So it's not really like Rapier like they described, it's just bad. Also, quick little mini rant about Masoris. Scrapping low life and just making Masoris effectively Pernix armor is the most boring way to make it good imaginable, and just kills the interesting dichotomy of Void being good against low defense and Armadillo being good against high. The old Masoris definitely needed some tweaking, but I was bouncing around ideas of doing Raids and Inferno with 49 HP, and it seemed like an incredibly interesting set. Personally, I would have scrapped the dodge effect like they did, and then scrapped the amulet. Instead, I would have either had the armor instantly cap your HP to 49, or make the set scale with your HP for more damage, from 80 to 20 HP or so, and way up to the damage bonus versus what they offered originally at the lowest health. I don't think it's horrible in its current design, but I would much prefer something more interesting. And that's about it for the video. Leave a like if you liked it, and or subscribe. Thanks, guys.